Number 4.
This is a story that my dad shared with me. He grew up in a small suburb community of Stowe, Idaho, with his parents and older sister. Across the street lived a boy named Richard Wade Cooey. He was the same age as my dad and described him as scrawny, red-headed, and a troublemaker. He would spit on people as they walked by and even set a house on fire in the neighborhood and blamed it on a kid who had special needs. Nothing he did as a child, however, could compare to the crime he committed when he was only 19 years old. My dad had just started his sophomore year of college when he heard the news. Richard and his friends, Clinton and Kenneth, were throwing pieces of concrete off a local bridge into the interstate when one of them struck the vehicle of 21-year-old Wendy Ofrendo. Her friend, 20-year-old Dawn McCary, was also in the car. They were sorority sisters who had just gotten off work at a local restaurant. At this point, Kenneth decided he had enough and went home. This is when Richard and Clinton came up with their evil scheme. Both of the young men approached the girls, offering them help, offering to give them a ride. They drove the girls to a shopping center, where they told them to call their parents and let them know that they were alright. The two then forced the girls back into the car, tied their hands together, and drove them to a field behind the local mall, where they raped, stabbed, and tortured them for 3 grueling hours. They abandoned their bodies in the field, but only after they carved large X's on their stomachs. Richard and Clinton then decided they wanted to sell the girls' clothing and jewelry to make some extra cash. When Richard couldn't find a buyer for the items, he burned them in his backyard, which woke my grandparents. My grandfather called the police to report what he thought was yet another neighborhood disturbance from Richard. The police gathered the items for evidence, and after finding Wendy's abandoned car, they arrested Richard and began the investigation. Clinton and Richard were both arrested and charged with murders. They had found a bloody pocket knife used to stab Wendy in the neck in Clinton's pocket when he was arrested, and some of the burned items still had traces of the girl's blood. Since Clinton was only 17, he was spared the death sentence and is currently serving life in prison. Richard, however, was given the death penalty. On October 14, 2003, at 10 a.m., he was executed by lethal injection. Wendy's family was present at this execution. Every time I visit my grandparents and look across the street at that house, I can't help but get the chills. Richard, I'm glad we never met, and I'm certainly glad my dad was smart enough to not become your friend growing up.
Number 3.
This actually happened to me when I was a kid. I'm a girl and was 8 years old when this happened. I grew up with my mum and my stepfather in an apartment in Chicago at the time. So, my stepfather was a crackhead. He used, I'm pretty certain, every day. He was a pretty good father considering he was high all the time. I felt way more close to him than I ever was with my mum. We spent tons of time together after his morning walks. His habit got really bad though. My mother was the only one who could work since he kept getting fired. My mother recently got new furniture, a whole living room set, 2 couches, lamps, end tables, rugs, and she even got a new TV. She was pretty proud and happy, mainly because she was able to hide enough money from my stepfather to buy everything. A few days after she got everything, my mum and I went to Burger King. We came back to the apartment, and my mother opened the door and her smile dropped. There was absolutely nothing in the living room. She told me to check my things. My bike, all my video games, my TV and clarinet were all gone as well. There were quite a few other things gone around the apartment. You already know who was the culprit. My stepfather. Apparently he owed some people for drugs. He said he had no choice. They said to pay up or it'll be everything he loves. As you can see, his habit was very, very bad. But now to the meat of the story. One day, I woke up to my stepfather calling me. It was pretty early. The sun had just started to peek into my room. I got up and heard him in the kitchen talking to someone frantically. I couldn't hear much since my door was closed, but I do remember making out a little bit. He said, "Man, she's beautiful, and you won't be disappointed." I slipped on my house shoes trying to figure out who he was talking to. I heard one response, but the voice was very deep, so I couldn't tell what was said. It was strange for anyone to be visiting our apartment, and especially strange since it was so early. I was tired, confused, and a bit annoyed at being woken up. I opened my door, and from it I have a straight line of sight to the kitchen. I see my stepfather nervously fidgeting, pacing, and talking. He saw me and said, "Here she is, man." I stood in my doorway and tried to give him a look like, who in the world is he talking to? He mentioned for me to come in. I walked into the kitchen and I see a tall, older white man with shades on. Looking back, maybe he was in his late 40s. He was balding, had a short beard, and he was dressed very nicely. My father said, "Here she is, what do you think?" My parents tend to show me off to people for some reason, so this wasn't odd to me. The man looked at me, and then looked back at my stepfather. My stepfather had the most nervous smile on his face I have ever seen. My father told me to give a twirl. I was not twirling in front of this strange guy, and definitely not this early. So he forcefully turned me. He held my nightgown taut so it was fitted against my body and said, "Not bad, right?" I pushed his hand off of me. This was clearly very, very strange now. I did not understand what the hell was going on, but I knew something was wrong. The entire time the white man said nothing. He just watched me. My stepfather said, "You're going to have to go with him now." I frowned and asked why, but before I could really start, the white man spoke. He squatted down to my height, smiled, and asked, "How old are you?" I said nervously, "I'm 8. He said, "You're a big girl then. Do you like school?" I said, "I love school." This little conversation and his smile made me feel a bit more at ease. I look over the man's shoulder and see my stepfather frowning, glaring at me, and it scares me. I have not seen him look like that except at suspicious people to warn them not to mess with him. I keep looking back at my stepfather, trying to answer this man's questions, knowing I said something wrong from my stepfather's reaction. The white man glances back at my stepfather while still squatted down to my height. My stepfather looks away in fear. The man stands up, looks back down to me and says, "It was nice talking to you. You're a very smart young lady. Now, go on back to bed." I was not used to anyone giving me orders except at school or my parents, but I knew not to question it and walked off to my room. I looked back and he was watching me. I stood inside my room at the door and looked back again. He said, "Close your door and go back to bed." I looked at him and he smiled back and motioned for me to go on. I closed the door and sat in my bed. I hear the man say something to my father in an angry voice. I hear my stepfather begging very loudly, "Please, please, just take her." The kitchen was a door leading to the outside staircase. My window was pretty close to it. I hear the kitchen door open, so I slid my window open a crack. I hear my stepfather repeatedly begging, "Please." The man yells, "She's a fucking kid." I try to peek out to see the staircase. There were 2 large men standing there near the door and on the stairs. The white man punches my stepfather, presumably. I can't really see the whole scene. I hear a thud, inside and outside. I suppose from him falling. The white man and the 2 men walk down the stairs to a nice black car parked in the alley. I hear the kitchen door close and soon after my bedroom door opens. My stepfather is drenched in sweat and smiles at me sheepishly and says casually to not tell my mother. I just stared at him. He then asked did I want to go to the park. I said no. He walked away and left the apartment. I sat there trying to put the pieces together. It clicked that my own stepfather was trying to sell me, more than likely to pay off a huge drug debt. Then everything else fell into place. The strange, oddly friendly white man considering taking me? Why would he take me? What would he do to me? Where would I go? What about my mum? Feelings of fear, anger and sadness flooded me. I laid there and cried for hours, thinking about how close I was to never seeing my mum again, and that my stepfather planned to do this to me. My mother eventually leaves him some years later. I still haven't told her about it, afraid she might lose it. I'm 26 now, and it's still hard to think about it without crying. Number 2. This happened yesterday at work, and I decided to post it here after mulling over it a bit. Here's some background info. I work for a company that receives donated clothes and goods that we give to those in need, mostly orphan children and low-income families. We drive 5-ton trucks around the province and pick up material from houses and businesses. We get a list at the beginning of the day with addresses, phone numbers, names, and special instructions. So here's the story. Yesterday I was on a run in our city and had a stop in what is nicknamed the Reserve, which is essentially a 20-block radius of low-income families and is the population centre for our First Nation locals, hence the name. This area has an extremely high crime rate and is really not a good place to be if you're white. The house on my list was just on the southern edge of the reserve, located across the street from a set of train tracks and a field. What was odd was that the list only had an address and special instructions, no name or number. This is the first time I had seen something like that in 6 years I've been doing this. The special instructions simply stated, "Empty house, come inside." When I arrived at the house, I was nervous as the house looked abandoned. The front door was missing, there were several broken windows, and the yard looked as though it hadn't been groomed for decades. A jungle of tall trees, weeds and trees obscuring a dilapidated building. Needless to say, I was on edge. In my experience, these kinds of houses were usually owned by drug users, so I assumed that whoever lived there was a drug user. I made a quick call to the office to make sure I had the right address, and it was confirmed. Shit. I parked the truck and made my way to the empty hole that was the front door. I knocked on the door frame, but there was no answer, so I stepped inside to see that the entire place was trashed. The place was completely bare, but it was filled with graffiti and holes in the walls. All of the light fixtures were broken, and there were puddles of water from rain the day before. I called out into the dark house and received no answer. So I walked into the next room and I found a piece of paper on the floor. The paper was standard printing paper with a message printed onto it. The message simply stated, "I'm in the basement." I found the doorway to what I assumed was the basement, but it was pitch black down there and a lot of the steps were broken. At this point my brain was screaming to get out. But I decided to do my job and call out to whoever was down there. I announced my presence and who I worked for and asked if anyone was down there. There was silence for a few moments, and then I heard an older man's voice coming from the darkness saying, "I'm down here." For some reason, this made the hair on my neck stand up, and I decided it was time to leave. I called out and said, "It's too dark down here, and these steps are broken. I'm afraid I can't come down, sir. If you want, you can call our office and reschedule the appointment for another day." There was silence for a few moments, and just as I was about to repeat myself, I heard the man say, "Don't worry about the steps. Just come down here." At this point, I normally would have just repeated what I had said, but I was in flight mode and wanted out of there, now. So instead of giving them a cheerful farewell, I speed walked to the front door and was walking onto the front steps when I heard the man's voice one more time saying, "Where are you going? Come back." I broke into a sprint and got into my truck as fast as possible. I put it in drive and took off, possibly breaking the land speed record in the process. I looked back at the house and half expected to see someone standing in the window like some horror cliche, but instead there was nothing. I called my boss and told him what happened, and he said that I should never have gone inside. He told me today that a few years ago they had 2 drivers go to similar abandoned houses and they were robbed by some members of a gang. He said those guys told a very similar story, except I wasn't robbed. With this in mind, I really do wonder if I was walking into some kind of trap, or if the guy was some kind of serial killer. Hell, maybe he was just a lonely man looking for some company, but I wasn't keen on finding out. I ended up putting the address on our do not pick up list so no drivers would go there anymore. He may have been an honest man trying to make a donation, but I wasn't going to risk the lives of my co-workers to find out. Everything about the scenario felt wrong and sketchy. I'm just glad I didn't get turned into a fucking lampshade. Number 1. Last week, I had lunch with my mum at Friendly's. For those who don't know, Friendly's is a popular restaurant on the East Coast. It is a fairly inexpensive, decent restaurant, I guess. The main demographic is young kids. My mother used to take me there all the time as a boy. As we were eating our meal, I observed a disheveled-looking man enter the restaurant. I thought he was homeless. He had thick glasses, a dirty beard, suspicious eyes, and really baggy clothing. His bald head was bleached with dirt. His presence made me a bit uncomfortable. I watched the hostess ask him if he needed a table for one, but he walked past her and sat by himself. A waitress swiftly brought out a Coke for him. My mother and I continued to chat and eat, but I kept my eye on him. Something about him made me very nervous. He never caught on to me staring because his eyes never wandered from the little boy in the booth in front of his. The waitress did not come back to serve him any food. He kept slowly sipping the Coke he ordered. The little boy and his family left, and the man got up. He paced around the restaurant a bit and found a new table to sit at. I thought it was odd that he would change seats. Soon, he got up and changed seats again. I began to catch on to what he was doing. He was changing his seat to sit near different little kids. The kids were with their parents, so there was not much he could do. However, he seemed to enjoy staring and making faces. I mentioned what was going on to my mum, and she called our waiter over. He told us that the man came in frequently and that he always ordered a Coke and changed his seat. We mentioned that he was following kids, but the waiter disagreed and told us that he is just a mentally handicapped person. We insisted that the restaurant would lose business unless they did something about this pervert. He admitted that they did get several complaints but could not ask him to leave or call the police because he technically hadn't done anything wrong and he was a paying customer like the rest of us. As the waiter walked back to the kitchen, he reassured us that the staff usually keep their eye on him anyway. My mum and I shrugged it off and finished our meal. The man had disappeared into the back of the restaurant and I could not see him anymore. As we waited for the check, a young boy with a balloon passed our table and went to the restroom. His mother and sister were still eating at the table. I had a bad feeling pretty instantly. Sure enough, the man came to the front of the restaurant and waited by the bathroom door. I watched the man intently. Nobody else came in or out, so he went in. I got a sinking feeling in my stomach immediately. Perhaps I was overthinking things because of my skeptical nature. I saw the staff goofing off behind the ice cream counter, and I did not make a fuss or call for help because I didn't want to make a scene if nothing was actually going on. However, I decided I needed to go into the bathroom myself, just to be sure. As I got closer to the bathroom door, I heard the boy saying something in a high-pitched tone. I pushed the door open and entered the bathroom. I saw the man's legs inside a stall from underneath, but I did not see the boy. I walked toward the stall swiftly and saw the door begin to close. I leapt toward it and placed my palm against it. I was met with resilience. When I finally got all my weight against the door, I was able to push it open enough to see the man standing in the stall with his pants down. His hand was covering the boy's mouth, who was sitting on the toilet. I immediately began shouting and the man started to grunt. I could tell there was something seriously wrong with him. I forced the door open even more. Several staff members rushed into the bathroom and grabbed the man. They dragged him out and tossed him to the ground. One of the staff members even kicked him in the face. At this point, the boy began to cry hysterically. I left the bathroom to see where his mother was. Everyone in the restaurant was standing and looking toward the bathroom. The chatter had stopped. The mother was rushing over with tears swelling in her eyes. The man was held down until police arrived and arrested him. The mother thanked me as she held her son's hand. I felt really sorry for him. He was looking at the floor and hiding behind her legs. G'day mates. Well, as always, I hope you all enjoyed the video. We're fast approaching 70,000 subscribers now, mates, and the Beehive is really gaining momentum. And because of this, guys, I came up with a bit of an idea for a potential 100,000 subscribers video. I'll need your help though for it, guys. I'd like to show a special video with all of you guys in it who support me and the channel here, and who make up the Beehive. If you would like to appear in the video, please send me a picture of your face via email. And if I get enough pictures, guys, I'll make this video. I'll leave a link to my email in the description below so that you guys can send the picture if you want. Also guys, next up will be a subscribers video. I'm going to try and do a slightly bigger video than normal this time, and the reason why is because I just love the subscriber story so much and I want to try and fit in as many as I can. So bear with me if the video doesn't come out right on time, guys. Also, just want to give a massive shout out to Anthony Salinas for his amazing thumbnail. He jimmied up for this video pretty quickly. I'll leave a link in the description below so that you guys can go check him out and throw some support at him, guys, as he's a bit of a beast of a designer. And lastly, guys, I just want to say a big thank you to all of you once again for all of your amazing support. Make sure you leave a like, comment, share the video, and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Don't forget to follow me as well, guys, on Twitter and Facebook to get leaks and to know what's up and coming next. And as always, guys, I'll see you mates in the next video.